Thank you for allowing me to have a few minutes of your time as I speak about taking back our educational keys. Just who has these keys, and more importantly, how do we get them back, will be determined by all of you. During the course of this presentation, I hope to say something that is at least slightly profound. I know I'll say something controversial, and I'll probably sprinkle in a little goofiness. Recently, I rewatched the movie Dead Poets Society. If you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while, I encourage you to rent it, buy it, stream it, or simply watch clips of it on YouTube. In the movie, Robin Williams, and rest in heaven, Robin, you were amazing. In the movie, Robin Williams plays the role of John Keating. Mr. Keating is an unconventional educator who uses poetry to inspire his students. And on the first day of class, he instructs them to open their books to page 21. A student reads aloud from a section entitled Understanding Poetry. Meter, rhyme, and figures of speech are all defined and then plotted on an XY coordinate plane. When finished, Mr. Keating says, excrement. Then he instructs his students to rip out the page. Rip it out. There's a flurry of activity as the students tear their pages, and suddenly they litter the floor. When I watched that scene, it seemed so incredibly obvious. Like, of course, you can't measure great works of poetry by simply plotting points on a graph. Unfortunately, in education today, when we ask our students to complete a project or an assignment, it's becoming all too rare when we don't attach some type of rubric. And after 2 decades in the classroom, and in speaking with fellow educators across the country and the world, quite frankly, I'm beginning to believe, and here comes one of those controversial moments, that the #1 killer of student creativity is the relentless use of rubrics. A rubric, if you're not familiar, contains a series of boxes. They may say advanced or developing. They may have numeric scores. You got a 2, why don't you go for a 3? Or in the case of our youngest learners, a bright yellow smiley face all the way down to a green, frowning Mr. Yuck. Let me provide a historical example of what I'm describing. In the 16th century, Pope Julius II commissioned the master, Michelangelo, to paint a few panels in the Sistine Chapel. He basically wanted the 12 apostles represented, and that would be good enough. In the beginning, there was friction between the artist and the Pope. Eventually, Pope Julius II relents, and he gives the master free rein. Instead of simply painting the 12 apostles, Michelangelo paints hundreds and hundreds of breathtaking figures, covering an area over 5,000 square feet, most of it on the ceiling, of course. Today, the Sistine Chapel is considered the cornerstone of the High Renaissance, quite possibly the greatest work of art ever forged from the human mind and heart. Incidentally, if you want to know what God himself looks like, Google it. And one of the images that comes up will be from Michelangelo. All because the restrictions were lifted. No rubric was utilized. Free rein was provided. Again, free rein was provided. And please know, I'm not anti-rubric. I use it in my very own classrooms. We just have to restore some balance. For every rubric I give, I believe I should also staple a sheet to their projects and assignments that simply say, be amazing, be transformational, or to use a John Greenism, don't forget to be awesome. This is an example of an educational key we must take back from the drive-by experts that are not a part of our school districts. They're not in our classrooms. They don't know our students, and yet they tell us it's good for kids. Really? Is it? Anyone take a test lately? How about a standardized test? I was recently watching television, and this hideous noise broke into my programming. And then this monotone voice said, "This is only a test." I thought, what perfect theme music for announcing a test. Or maybe the song from Jaws would be slightly better. Does the thought of taking a standardized test and a comparison of your results to others make you a little nervous, a little anxious, downright fearful? Well, count yourself lucky if you're not a student today. Our children are exposed to regional, state, multi-state, and federally mandated high-stakes testing so they can be stacked and then sorted and then notified whether or not they measure up, whether or not they are good enough. Ironically, as I prepared this presentation today, I tried to find the total number of school days in a calendar year lost to standardized testing. I could not find a definitive number. The articles I read said, well, that all depends now on the amount of time allotted to test prep, teaching the test themselves, post-test analysis, mining the data, do it all over again. Let me provide another example. Now, this is probably a little bit goofy, and this may not be the first time you've heard a version of this story, but it really drives home the point. Let's say that we are instructing our students on the finer points of water skiing. One of my students, Dante, takes such copious notes as I teach to the test that we have to invent a new grade for him, the AAA+. Then, excitedly, our class takes a trip to the lake. They want to see Dante in action. So do I. Dante readies himself in the water, holding up the tips of his skis. I come around the dock in my 40-foot, bright red, carbon fiber, twin turbo, 1,500 horsepower, fuel-injected, nitrous-infused race boat. Yes. We all wait in anticipation as he holds the yellow ski rope. Got that handle. What do you think is going to happen to Mr. AAA+ when I jam down the throttle? It'll be a catastrophe. His body's going to flip around like it's bouncing off concrete. What does Dante actually know about water skiing? Nothing. Why? He was a passive learner. He was never engaged. He never had an opportunity to learn from experience. This is another educational key we must take back from those that push and, yes, profit from relentless, high-stakes, standardized testing. One more belief I'm starting to develop, and here comes another controversial moment, is that high-stakes testing creates information deficiency. You know, I told my students that boat story, and they said, well, let's have an experience with water skiing. And this is what we did. Go. Jeez. Recently when I ran into Angela, I said, now where'd you learn how to water ski again? She said, in the basement of our school. We seem to be moving away from an environment that nurtures a love of learning. Instead, we create a false reality for our students, one that makes them believe that their future potential can be measured by a solitary point on a bell-shaped curve. Here's an anecdotal example, and it makes me very uneasy. This past school year, I had a student named Aurelia. Right before class one day, Aurelia comes in and says, Mr. Wittmann, I'm never going to starving to death or I'm dying of thirst. Why not? Aurelia asked. Because, Mr. Wittmann, right now, there are millions of children that are literally starving to death and dying of thirst. And while I might be a bit hungry or thirsty, I know there's always going to be something for me to eat and drink. Well, if I had hair on my head, it would have stood up at that very moment. And you should know, Aurelia is not a very good standardized test taker, and I received her permission to tell you that. Her comment was transformational. I will never use those expressions myself, ever. So who am I, or who is some test generator or some politician to tell this precious child, you do not measure up, you are not good enough? Calculating IQ the way we do almost seems like a sophisticated form of abuse. Daniel Goleman is a prolific author, and he writes about emotional intelligence. Dr. Goleman believes emotional intelligence, or EQ, is a better indicator of future success than IQ. And shouldn't we all be a little more mindful of the role our emotions play in education? The fact is, when you tie emotion to instruction, it becomes more memorable. Case in point, if I asked you what you had for breakfast a week ago, you probably wouldn't recall. Why not? It wasn't memorable, and I wouldn't know either. However, on July 22nd, 2014, Tuesday, at exactly 9 a.m., I can tell you I just finished eating a 3-egg omelet. My coffee was lukewarm at best, and I had 2 scoops of sugar-free cappuccino mix in there. My lovely wife, my oldest son were at work. My other son was upstairs sleeping. Why do I remember all these details? Because I was worried sick about my niece, Serena. a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines. Typhoon Glenda had just devastated and ravaged the area that she was working in. At exactly 9 a.m. on that date, my phone rang. The sweet little voice on the other end said, "I'm okay, Uncle Troy." Serena told me how she had to pick up broken glass, clear brush, comfort children, waited days for the power to come back on. And then Serena says, "I'm living the dream of a Peace Corps volunteer." The joy that I felt as I spoke to my niece made everything it made everything magical. More than memorable. It made it magical. Regrettably, the current trend in education of chalk and talk and sit and get and drill and kill is draining the joy from our classrooms. We need to take back the educational key that allows learning to be exciting, engaging, memorable, and yes, magical. The two young ladies I spoke of, Aurelia and Serena, are not only emotionally intelligent, they're emotionally brilliant. Incidentally, alongside Serena is her equally beautiful and intelligent grandmother, Miss Judy. Does the rise in ADD, attention deficit disorder, alarm anyone? I will always defer to a quality physician as to whether or not one of my students has ADD. However, as a professionally trained educator, I believe it's my responsibility to have my students standing and rolling, moving, creating, debating, role-playing, rapping, dancing, singing, working cooperatively, and so much more. My goal should always be to create a love of learning. We need to ask ourselves, do we want one more student that's considered statistically significant, reaching the 89th percentile on some bell-shaped curve, or do we want to inspire the next Michelangelo? Imagine if you were the parent of a child with ADD and the topic of medication wasn't discussed. Instead, you were made to feel as if your child had a gift. You were told, in this school, we don't sit. We stand and we roll. We don't watch, we do. We don't prevent, we participate. Your child has a gift. Your child will fit in perfectly. Imagine how this would feel. Your child with the gift of ADD will fit in perfectly. Imagine current and future educators taking a tour of your school, because it's transformational, of course. Imagine the science wing where the students become the solar system, or the room at the end of the hall you're too afraid to show them because it sounds more like a military training ground than it does a classroom with all those explosions. Imagine math class. Instead of the Pythagorean theorem of a squared plus b squared equals c squared, the instructor, a local actor, high school drama student, becomes Pythagoras himself. This guy is wickedly smart, on the run, a little cray-cray, and so much more interesting. He's so much more interesting than a simple theorem. Imagine if your literacy coach has a time machine. He or she takes the book Moby Dick, drops it in a slot, and this happens. Don't call me Ishmael. Call me by the name that Herman Melville gave me. Call me Captain Ahab. And I'm on the hunt. I'm on the hunt for Moby Dick. Has anyone seen that elusive whale? And I certainly want to recognize the many wonderful, hardworking educators and administrators that are doing what I'm describing and more, much more each and every day. You have not surrendered your educational keys, and your students benefit from your courage. Personally, I want to acknowledge my test scores are never high enough, and I think I'm done apologizing for it. Fortunately, I'm in a school district. I've never encouraged or even asked to, scare my students to teach to the test. It's not even brought up. Do we want to do well? Of course we want to do well. We all want to do well. Maybe what we should say to anyone, anywhere, that feels our students don't measure up due to some quantifiable score is, we don't teach to the test, we educate to inspire. My father, Andy Wittmann, and rest in heaven, Dad, because you were amazing. My father said there's three types of people in this world. Those that make things happen, those that watch things happen, and those that wonder what the hell just happened. This UW-Milwaukee TEDx conference, why not? Why not be the generation that empowers and engages our students? Let's make things happen. At this time, I'd like you to check your pocket or purse. I'd like you to check your pocket or purse, and I'd like you to see if there's a key in there. I want you to take that key and I want you to hold it in your hand and let it be a personal reminder to you. In education, we open the doors to help our students realize their infinite potential. Charles Dickens said it this way: a very little key can open a great big door. It is time to take back our educational keys and open those mighty doors for our students. Thank you and God bless.